What's up, Cleared Professionals? Tony here. Happy Friday to everyone that is either watching this live or you're watching the recording. I hope that you guys have amazing plans coming up for this weekend. And I know I had an amazing weekend this past weekend. We've got amazing plans going on, but I want to kind of get into that really quick. Some of you guys have seen that I competed in jiu-jitsu. If you know me and you've read my profile, I'm a major MMA fan. I absolutely love everything about MMA. UFC is one of my biggest sports. I don't know what it is. Some people get really excited about football. Some people get really excited about basketball, and I absolutely love those sports. But something about MMA and UFC and the fighting, I don't know. It keeps me up at night just thinking about every little detail. So if you want to talk about fighters and some fights and some amazing things, I'm going to be your guy. But this past weekend, I competed in jiu-jitsu. It's the main sport right now that I am focused on, but I do Muay Thai, kickboxing. Those are mainly the main ones that I'm interested in. But jiu-jitsu right now, I'm on a journey to compete at Worlds, and IBJJF is one of the largest, if not the largest, jiu-jitsu competition organization in the world. And I got a chance to get out of my comfort zone this past weekend, and mindset comes to mind in just about anything and everything that I do. But for some reason, it made me really think about how much mindset plays a part, not just in jiu-jitsu, but in your job search. I can tell you, majority of the people that I know that have taken a very long time, including myself, when I had my first stint of being out of work for 8 months, many years ago, it was my mindset. It was my self-image. It was how I perceived myself when I looked at myself in the mirror. And I know that that sounds weird, but it is the quiet thing that most people don't consider. It is the thing that underpins how successful your job search is, meaning how quickly you can find a job. And in this, you know, I had 4 fights altogether, and the 2 fights in my division, I ended up winning. I got gold. But the biggest thing was I signed up for Open Class. And for those of you that don't know, Open Class is everyone in your age bracket at any weight level. So my first match, I had 2 fights to gold in Open Class. My first match was against a guy that was 260 plus pounds. I know because the guy told me. I'm not throwing shade or anything like that. Hats off to him. He's probably not watching this, but I don't want to badger him or belabor him or say anything negative about him because he was an amazing opponent. But he took me down. He was in what they call half guard. He was in my half guard, and for whatever reason, he couldn't get out, right? Which was a big benefit to me because I could play my game from there. Well, he was smothering me. And while he was smothering me and doing all that stuff, when you could barely breathe, your mind starts to go crazy. I got to quit. I got to tap. There's too much pressure. This hurts, yada. And we went all the way down to about 1.5 minutes, and I'll show the video here here in a second, actually. So we went about 1.5 minutes in the video, as you can see. And what was crazy about this was I ended up finding the sweep. And then the last 1.5 minutes, I ended up passing the guy's guard. He's tossing me all over the place. I'm trying to stay on top, trying to stay in north-south for those of you guys that are into jiu-jitsu. And I end up winning the match. And what was crazy to me about that was what was going on in my mind throughout that entire process. I need to quit. I could just tap. This Open Class match is just me gathering more points so that I have a higher chance of getting a bye. Meaning I get a bye to the next round, which means I don't have to fight 5 or 6 fights in a row. I can just fight 4 or 5 or maybe 3 to 4, which would be a big advantage for energy retention and all that other good stuff. And so anyway, it was a really big thing. And as I was reflecting on my drive back home Saturday night from Dallas, I started reflecting and I thought, man, it is so amazing how mindset plays a part in just about anything. And if you're watching this live, I think that you would agree. Make a comment below. I probably won't be able to see any of the comments until after because I'm a one-man show with this podcast. But I promise you I will get to them and I will interact with every single one of the comments that are left. Unless you're trying to sell me some resume writing service, I'll just be kind and say no thank you. But anyway, that's beside the point. And so I thought a lot about that. And one of these days, one of these weeks, I will talk heavily about mindset and why it's important and things that you can do to maybe look at whatever blind spots you might have to be made aware of that you can work on while you're out there searching for a job. It is the thing that underpins your job search and how successful it can be. But I want to talk about some misconceptions here. And one of the biggest misconceptions that I see about interviews in general, which is what today's episode is about, is that most people think that they're being interviewed on their technical skills. We're diving right into this, okay? And sometimes they are, right? But I don't think that's the entire interview, okay? Let's think about this for a second, okay? Have you ever walked out of an interview feeling like, man, absolutely nailed that. I feel confident. You're on the phone with your spouse and you're saying, I think I did a really good job because when they asked me this question, I responded and it was amazing. I can't wait to hear back. They told me they would get back to me at the end of the week. And then all of a sudden, you get a rejection email a few days later, or maybe even worse. You never hear anything at all. And then you start replaying that interview again in your head. Was it my answer? Did I say something wrong? Did they just find somebody better? And after 17 years of recruiting, I could tell you something that completely changed the way that I think about interviews. Hiring managers aren't just trying to figure out, can this person do the job? They think that you could do the job. The resume got you in the room. The recruiter screen write-up got you in the room. They're trying to answer a completely different question. They're asking themselves, can I trust this person on my team? And that's a very different interview, in my opinion, because now they're paying attention to things that most candidates don't even realize that the hiring manager is evaluating. They're evaluating how you think. They're evaluating how you communicate, how you handle pressure, how you talk about previous employers, even how you answer a question when you don't even know the answer. So today, I want to pull back the curtain in this space a little bit. And I'm going to talk to you, I'm going to walk you through what I've learned from sitting on hundreds of interview debriefs with hiring managers and hundreds of interview debriefs with the candidates themselves. This isn't meant for generic interview advice. This isn't a, hey, wear a nice suit type of advice. I'm talking about what hiring managers are actually talking about after you leave the room. Because if you understand how they're making the decision, you'll interview completely differently. Welcome back to Beyond the Badge. So let's start with the question I hope that you're asking yourself right now. If hiring managers aren't just evaluating my technical skills, what are they actually looking at? Because I can tell you this after years and years of recruiting, sitting in debriefs and talking with hiring managers after the interviews that they've conducted, I have noticed something. I'll ask them, so what did you think? And a lot of the times they'll say something like, I knew pretty early. Think about that for a second. They didn't say, I figured it out after the technical questions, or I decided after the interview was over. They'll say, I knew within the first 10 or 15 minutes. Now, does that mean that the rest of the interview doesn't matter? Of course not, okay? But first impressions matter more. They matter more than most people realize. I'm getting my words tongue-tied here. And here's where I think candidates get this wrong, okay? They think that those first few minutes are just introductions, just small talk, just a chance to get comfortable. And personally, I don't think that they are, okay? I think that they are part of the overall interview. Actually, I think that they're one of the most important parts because before a hiring manager starts thinking, can this person do the job? They're usually trying to answer another question. Can I see myself working with this person every single day? And that's a trust question, not a technical question. Can I give you an example here? Let's say I interview two systems engineers. Okay, both are technically qualified, both answer the technical questions really, really well. One candidate comes across really curious, they're prepared, they're engaged, they've clearly done a little homework about the company. And when I ask why they're interested, they give me a thoughtful answer that's specific to the role. The other candidate, they're also qualified, but every answer feels generic. I'm looking for new opportunities. I just want to grow. I heard your company is hiring. And none of those answers are wrong per se, right? But they don't tell me why this opportunity matters most to them. Do you see the difference? One candidate is interviewing for this role. The other candidate is interviewing for any role. Hiring managers notice that, okay? Now, let me ask you another question. If I asked you why this company, How quickly could you answer that question? Not with something that you memorized. I'm talking about a real answer because that's one of the first things hiring managers are evaluating. Have you done your homework? Do you understand what this team actually does, or are you hoping to figure it out after you get hired? Here's another one. Can you explain what you actually do? Not your title, but what you actually do. I know that some of the work that we do is classified, some of the systems that we use are classified, but can you articulate that in an unclassed setting effectively? Not when after your resume has been sent through Prepub, okay? I've interviewed candidates who spent 5 minutes describing their career and still couldn't tell. I still couldn't tell you where they created value. Okay. Then I've had candidates say something like, I'm a systems engineer supporting a classified infrastructure. And over the last 4 years, I've led 2 major modernization efforts. And most of my experience has been around VMware and enterprise storage. 30 seconds. I already know where to take the conversation. The hiring manager does too. And let me make this point, okay? Those first few minutes aren't about impressing someone. They're about making it easy for the hiring manager to understand who you are, why you're there, and what value that you bring to the table. Everything else builds from there, if you will, okay? So before your next interview, don't just prepare answers. Prepare your introduction. Prepare why you're interested. Prepare how you'll explain your value in a way that's clear, that's conversational, and that's memorable, okay? Because if the hiring manager understands who you are in the first 10 minutes, the rest of the interview becomes a whole lot easier. How you start the interview is usually how it's going to end. So let's talk about behavioral questions here for a minute, because I think this is where a lot of clear professionals prepare for the wrong interview. You know the questions I'm talking about here, okay? Tell me about a time that you disagreed with your manager. Tell me about a time that, about a mistake that you made. Tell me about a difficult coworker. Most people immediately think, okay, I need a good story. And don't get me wrong here, having a good story definitely matters, but I think you're asking yourself the wrong question. Instead of asking, what's the best answer? Ask yourself, why are they even asking me this in the first place? Okay, let's think about it for a second. If I ask you, tell me about a mistake that you made, am I really trying to figure out whether you've ever made a mistake? No, of course not. Everybody has. I've made mistakes. You've made mistakes. We've all made mistakes. What I'm trying to really figure out is, what do you do after you make one? Do you own it? Do you learn from it? Or do you spend 5 minutes explaining why it wasn't really your fault? That's a very, very different question. Cool? Here's another one. Tell me about a time that you disagreed with your manager. Most candidates think that this is a conflict question. Personally, I don't, especially in the cleared world. I'm listening for something completely different, okay? Can you disagree professionally? In other words, can you disagree without being disagreeable? Disagreeing is a mindset thing. Being disagreeable is a countenance thing. It's who you are. Can you raise a concern without becoming the concern? Because let's be honest, if you've ever worked in this industry long enough, you've probably disagreed with leadership at some point in time, okay? The hiring manager isn't expecting blind agreement. They're trying to understand your judgment. How do you handle yourself when things don't go your way? Can I trust you inside a chain of command? That's what they're evaluating. Here's another one that I hear all the time. Tell me about a difficult coworker. Now, let me ask you something here. How many times have you worked with someone who was difficult? Probably all of us have, okay? But here's what the hiring manager is wondering. How are you going to talk about that person today? Because the way that you describe your previous coworker might be the way that you describe them 6 months from now. Think about that. If your entire story is about how terrible the other person was and how everyone else was the problem, what message do you think that sends them? On the other hand, if we say we had different communication styles and I realized I needed to adjust how I approached the conversations with them, and over time we developed a much better working relationship. Now I'm learning something. Now that hiring manager is learning something. We're learning that you're adaptable, that you're self-aware, that you don't immediately look for someone to blame. And in the cleared community, those qualities definitely matter. Here's another one. Tell me about a time that you had to make a decision without all the information. Have you ever noticed how often that happens in our world? You're supporting a classified mission, information is compartmentalized, right? Requirements change, deadlines don't move, and sometimes you have to make the best decision that you can with the information that you have. So, when hiring managers ask that question, they're not looking for the perfect answer. They're trying to understand your process, how you think, how do you assess risk, how do you make decisions under pressure. That's what they're listening for. So before your next interview, can I challenge you to do something a little bit different? Don't just prepare 5-star stories. Now, if you don't know what STAR is, it's your situation, your task, your action, and your result. It's how you frame your answers. It's how companies like Amazon prefer when that you respond to them, when you're interviewing with them. Okay, so take each question and ask yourself, if I were the hiring manager, what would I actually be trying to learn about this person? Because once you understand the purpose behind the question, your answer becomes much more natural. You're no longer trying to impress someone. You're helping them answer the question that they've already been asking themselves. And I think that's where great interviews begin, in my opinion. So let's talk about the technical interview, okay? Because I think this is where a lot of really good candidates lose confidence. Maybe you've been there. You walk into the interview feeling prepared, then they ask you one question that you weren't expecting, and then all of a sudden your mind goes blank. I've had it happen to me. You've had it happen to you. Honestly, this week I've had it happen maybe once or twice. And from that point on, you spend the rest of the interview thinking, well, I freaking blew it, okay? Can I tell you something that might surprise you? Sometimes the hiring manager already knows you don't know the answer. Think about that for a second, especially if you're interviewing for a mid-level or senior role. They're not expecting you to know every technology, every framework, every tool, or every obscure command that they've ever used. That's really not realistic. So, why ask the question to begin with? Because they're trying to learn something else here. They're trying to understand, how do you think when you don't know? That's the interview. Not whether you can recite some documentation from memory. I've talked to hiring managers after technical interviews, and one thing that comes up over and over and over again is they'll say something like, he didn't know the answer, but I loved how he worked through it. Or she was honest about the answer she didn't know and then explained how she'd exactly go and find the answer. That right there is what sticks with hiring managers. Now, compare that to the candidate who panics or worse, starts making something up. Can I give you a piece of advice? If you don't know, just say you don't know. Now, before you think I'm telling you to stop there, don't, because the next sentence is the most important one. Instead of saying, I don't know, and kind of sitting there in silence, try something like this. I haven't worked with that specific technology, but here's how I'd approach understanding it. Or you can say something like, I don't know the exact answer, but based on what I know about similar systems, here's how I'd start thinking through the problem. Do you hear the difference there? One answer ends the conversation and the other one starts a conversation. And that's exactly what a hiring manager wants. They're trying to understand how your brain works. Can you reason through a problem? Can you connect ideas? Can you stay calm under pressure? Because let's be honest, that's what the job looks like. Very few people walk into work every single day knowing exactly what's going to happen. Requirements change. Customers change priorities, systems break, something that you've never seen before lands on your desk, and the hiring manager isn't hiring someone to answer yesterday's questions. They're hiring someone who can solve tomorrow's problems. Whew, man, I get really passionate about this stuff because I really, really, really hope that you can feel I'm trying to help you in your job search. And I guess I got a little smoke of battle on me because I'm in this process with you right now as we speak. Cool? Here's something else that I've noticed. The candidates who perform the best in technical interviews don't try to sound like the smartest person in the room. They stay curious. They ask clarifying questions. If the problem isn't completely clear, they say, can I make sure that I understand what you're asking clearly? Because to me, that's not a weakness. That's exactly what good engineers do, okay? That's exactly what good program managers do. That's exactly what good cleared professionals do in general, okay? They clarify before they solve. And hiring managers notice that. Now, I know some of you are probably listening to this thinking, okay, Tony, but what if I really don't know anything about what they're asking? That's a fair question. If that's happening over and over and over again, it may not be an interview problem. It might be a preparation problem. Did you read the job description carefully? Did you understand the technologies that they're using? Did you spend a little time refreshing yourself on the fundamentals before the interview actually happened? Do you have to become an expert overnight? No. But you do have to know a little something and refresh yourself. You should walk into that interview understanding what you're interviewing to do, okay? Because the confidence comes from preparation, okay? Not pretending. What is that saying? Success is when preparedness and opportunity meet, right? So if you're preparing and the opportunity shows up and you've prepared well, you'll have success. Cool? Whew. All right. Here's probably the biggest takeaway that I can give you. The strongest candidates that I've worked with aren't the ones who know everything. They're the ones who know what they know, and they're honest about what they don't. And they're confident that they can bridge the gap. That's a different kind of confidence. It's quiet, it's authentic, and in my experience, it's exactly the kind of confidence hiring managers trust. So, let's say the interview's over. You shook everyone's hand. You walked back to your car. Now what? You know what's interesting? Most candidates think that there's nothing left to do. They wait, they refresh their email, replay every answer in their head, wonder whether they said the right thing or not. Does that sound familiar to you? Can I tell you what I do instead? I'd use those next 30 minutes because those 30 minutes can make you better for every interview that you ever have. Okay? Here's something that I've learned. The candidates who improve the fastest aren't necessarily the ones who interview the most. They're the ones who learn from every interview that they have. So before you drive home, before you jump back into work, before life gets busy, ask yourself 4 simple questions. What went really well? Not, I think that went okay. I want you to be specific. Maybe you connected well with the hiring manager. Maybe your technical discussion felt natural. Maybe you told a story that really landed. Those are things that you want to repeat. Now, here's the second question. Where did I struggle? Did you ramble? Did one technical question catch you off guard? Did you realize halfway through an answer that you weren't really answering the question? I've done that. That's valuable information. Not because you didn't get this job, because you just learned something about yourself before the next interview. Here's the third question. What did I learn about the role that I didn't know before today? I love this question because interviews aren't just about them evaluating you. You're evaluating them too. Did the work sound like what you expected? Did the team seem collaborative? Did anything surprise you? Those answers matter if an offer comes later. And finally, here's my favorite question. If I had to do that interview over again tomorrow, what's the one thing that I do differently? Just one, not 10, but just one. Keep it simple because that's how you improve. One conversation at a time. Now, there's one more thing that I want to talk to you guys about. And I think it's something that takes maybe 5 minutes, if that. The thank you note. I know some people think that they're outdated. Some people think that nobody reads them. Maybe, maybe not. Who knows? But let me tell you why I still like them. Not because they're going to magically get you the job. That's not what they're for. They're an opportunity to reinforce the impression you already made. Think about it. Hiring managers may interview 4, 5, 6 candidates over the course of a few days. Conversations start blending together after a while, and a thoughtful follow-up helps remind them who you are. And here's the key. Don't send a generic email. Thanks for your time. I really appreciate the opportunity. Anyone can write that. Instead, reference something that you talked about. Maybe they mentioned a challenge on the program. Maybe you discussed a technology that they're migrating to. Maybe they talked about building a brand new team. Bring that back up. Then connect your experience to it and finish by letting them know that you're excited about the opportunity. That's it. 4 sentences, 5 minutes. Could it make the difference every time? No. But if 2 candidates are neck and neck, why wouldn't you give yourself every opportunity to stand out? Because here's the truth. You don't control who gets the offer. You never have. But you do control how prepared you are, how you communicate, how you follow up, and how much you learn from every single interview. Those are the things that essentially compound over time. And in my experience, that's what separates candidates who eventually build incredible careers from candidates who keep wondering why they're always the runner up. So let me leave you with this. I don't think great interviews happen because someone memorized the perfect answers. I think that they happen because someone understood what the hiring manager was actually trying to learn. Throughout this episode, we talked about first impressions, behavioral questions, technical interviews, and what you do after you leave the room. None of those things are about interviewing. They're about trust, because that's the question every hiring manager is trying to answer. Can I trust this person on my team? Not to just do the work, but to solve problems, communicate well, own the mistakes, learn quickly, and represent the mission professionally. If you can help them answer that question, you've already separated yourself from a lot of the candidates that are out there. If you found this episode helpful, I'd appreciate it if you'd share it with another Cleared professional who's essentially preparing for an interview now. Maybe this week, maybe they wish they had this week. Perhaps they have an interview on Monday. I don't know. But share it with them. Chances are they are focused on the same technical questions that may not, and they may not realize what hiring managers are actually evaluating. And if we're not connected yet here on LinkedIn, I'd love to connect with you on LinkedIn, where I share practical recruiting insights and answer questions from the Cleared community every single week. I go live on YouTube as well. So if YouTube is your thing, follow us and subscribe on YouTube. Obviously, every single week, Mondays, now on Mondays, the podcast episodes, the recording of these podcasts get launched and released on Apple and Spotify. So wherever you get your content, whether this is the best platform for you or perhaps those other channels that I mentioned. Until next time, keep learning, keep preparing, and remember, you're not interviewing to prove that you're perfect. Blah. You're not interviewing to prove that you're perfect. You're interviewing to show you're someone that they can trust. I'll see you on the next episode.